Hello everyone, and we're back already with our third episode of the season. It feels like it's all going so quickly. This week I'm quite excited because it's a pretty special one, especially for me, as I have watched this particular musician and performer and now artistic director since I was in high school. I am very, very, very excited to welcome along the incredible Claire Edwards onto the podcast for our third episode. Claire is a leading percussionist who works as a soloist, a recorded performer with many albums, and in fact another one on the way, as well as a chamber musician, and is the current artistic director of Ensemble Offspring. She is a forefront figure for the commissioning and the performance of contemporary Australian music, having premiered works by composers such as Harrison Birtwistle and Elena Kats-Chernin. Claire remains the only Australian to have won the APRA Art Music Award for excellence by an individual 3 times. So without further ado, welcome Claire to Declassify.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this and putting
No
some
worries.
time aside. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I've always been interested in how you got to where you are, not specifically just with EO, but also your reputation as a soloist, because I've seen you perform so many times with orchestras and as a soloist, and also the fact that you teach at the con. How did that happen where you had this amalgamation of all these different streams of music that have now joined together?
Yeah, well, I guess intrinsically as a musician, you sort of get taught not to rely on one income stream or one thing as the only thing that you would do. And so I guess there's definitely an element of that. But of course, they're all intrinsically related, one feeds into another. So the teaching is, I wouldn't say teaching's my main thing by any means, and I don't even think I'm the best teacher in the world necessarily, but I try. And in my teaching, I really like to impart my own personal priorities, I guess, in my career, which isn't a typical career for a percussionist, because I think a lot of students at the con get taught and go through that degree with the assumption that they're going to join an orchestra one day. So it's a kind of weird thing for me as someone who's not in an orchestra to be their teacher. And it feels like a little bit of an uphill battle, kind of convincing them of the fact that there is an alternative, and that to me seems so weird in this day and age. Like, there's a finite number of percussion jobs in orchestras in Australia and the world, of course. And I feel like it's much more realistic how I've built my career in this day and age, because I have control as a mother as well. I have control over my schedule. So as the artistic director of Ensemble Offspring, I make all the schedules and I can sort of fit that in around as my kids have grown up. That's been able to reflect that. So it's a pretty fortunate position to be in, I think, being able to balance all these things. I never get bored, because when I am able to perform, I only would do, a handful of concertos with an orchestra a year, and I love it. I would never only want to do that though, because it's a lonely thing to do. So I feel very lucky, I think, with where my career has ended up, because through the combination of all the different things I do, I get so much satisfaction.
Beautiful. It's so fascinating. You're right. Having a little bit more control over how your life is perhaps something that a lot of my younger musician friends, who are performing and who have, as you said, trained to just take orchestral roles, they haven't quite considered yet. So right now, a lot of them are doing all the audition routes internationally and all the competition tournaments internationally as well.
So I think they get taught how to do auditions, for example, and then this assumed thing. What maybe it's slightly more they're getting taught, but it's still not enough, I don't think, is all the other things that you need to say, run your own business, make your own career as a soloist, all the communication that's required, the administration, the budgeting, all those things. I find that exciting. Like I find that way more exciting than practicing excerpts. And but I think a lot of people think, why would I complicate my life with all that other stuff? I don't even want to do that stuff. So yes, it's not for everyone, but I think it's probably for more people than than they assume.
Because I don't remember when I was studying at the con. Maybe it's a bit different because I'm a composer, but at the same time, I wasn't really learning the business skills, or I wasn't taught, for example, like how to look for funding, or that I should look for funding, or how to ask for money for grants and things like that. And that was something I learned after I left the conservatorium. And that would have been a super helpful skill.
I help a lot of young people with doing grants, and especially to do with Ensemble Offspring through our Hatched Academy. I'm very kind of forthcoming with my help and my assistance and my advice, and with all my years of experience, because I really feel for younger people, because it's not set up to sort of for them to have success. You know, they're going against people like me who have experience doing grants. So, and you don't learn how to do it. And I'm very very happy, and I think it's important that people like me do help younger people with that process, because it's not easy. It's not an easy one to navigate. But once you know how to do it, of course, the world's your oyster to a certain degree.
Yes. Thank you to mentors like you, because I wouldn't have been able to make it through those first few grants, because I also had help from my ex composition teachers. There was no way for me to understand how that system worked without their aid. Yeah. Well, I have to say, it's a bit different over here in England. I just wrote my first grant here, and there's a section in the grant which isn't in the ones in Australia, which is slightly concerning to me, but there's a section in the grant that asks you to detail how much experience you've already had with grants. And to prove like administrative skills, and how, previous projects that you've been in charge of in terms of distributing funds or budgeting. And I thought, wow, that would be really difficult if you're 18 or 17, you haven't had your foot through the door yet.
Yeah. I mean, in a way it's good, because it means that hopefully they'll have a different system of judging the application if you say that you've never done it before. You'd hope.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I assumed it was for that reason, and now I'm realizing it's probably not. But anyway, oh God, that is a bit scary.
Fingers crossed that's why. In kind of keeping with how the trajectory of your career has transformed over the last 20 to 30 years, did you ever have a musical mission when you first started studying percussion at the conservatorium, and how has that changed and developed along with your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not that old, by the way, Vicky. I'm 45, so I wouldn't say I've had a career for 30 years. That would be pretty amazing.
You started playing young.
Well, I did, but I definitely wasn't making money when I was 15. But, I went into the con knowing I'd already made a choice that wasn't the most mainstream choice. I made a choice not to be a concert pianist. I knew I could be a concert pianist or an accompanist. And because I got nervous, I got to a really high level on piano, and I got really nervous. And I worked out that I wasn't really cut out to be a concert pianist, although I had the musical skills. Like, I got my LMAS, and I was really quite, skilled pianist. But I thought, I don't really want to be an accompanist my whole life. Like, I knew I enjoyed playing with other people, but that role of being an accompanist, I knew it wasn't quite my personality. So I thought that's when I had the idea to do percussion. So I had sort of taught myself during high school, but I'd never really had lessons. So it was quite a kind of going out on a limb to decide to study percussion as in a bachelor course. And I think for me it was the right one musically. Like, if I think about that I was a professional pianist now, I could be someone like Zubin, doing kind of quite cutting edge stuff with my instrument, and he does amazing things. But I think percussion, as much as I hate lugging the instruments, suits me more, because it's intrinsically dealing with things in a different way, because we have to, we don't have that repertoire that piano has. And so I think it was gradual at the con. I met composers through this class that we have called CPW, Composer Performer Workshop. I'm sure you know it, Vicky. Yes. I miss it. I used to be a CPW mentor for ages, and since COVID they've been doing it differently, and I haven't done it for quite a few semesters, and I miss it because I love CPW. It's this bringing together of composers and performers, which in a way feels so forced at uni. And so I would always take those classes as the lecturer, and kind of say, like, we're all in this together. There's no one-upmanship. No one's better than anyone else. You know, this is a process. We need each other. We're doing this together. And because I remember when I was a student, it wasn't really like that, and all the performers would just try and get out of it all the time. But I loved it. Like, I loved that process of working with the composers on music that they were creating in real time. And then that's what led to the Spring Ensemble. And we were invited to play in Roger Woodward's Spring Festival, and I met Damien Ricketson and Matthew Shlomowitz. And then I guess this thing of just playing music that was different and wasn't like what everyone else was doing was just got in my blood. And I was the person at the library, like, trying to find, it was before the internet, trying to find all the pieces that no one else was doing in their recital, you know. And so I always wanted to do things differently, I think, but I don't think I was conscious that it would lead to this, if you know what I mean, at that time.
It all unfolds with time.
Yeah.
Which, actually, with that, the CPW, when I did it at the con, I'm still in touch with all of those musicians that I was lucky enough to meet. So I'd actually, anyone who's studying it now, don't try and miss it. You'll make the best musical bonds through taking that class. Yeah, it was a great time. And we wrote for such weird ensemble groupings. There were 2 pianos, soprano, oboe. So it really pushed my study. So yeah, and hopefully when things start to get a little bit more normal, you can go back to lecturing CPW. Yes, great. Well, I suppose this leads us on to like the next section, where I'm curious about Ensemble Offspring itself, and seeing as were those the seeds of the beginning of the Spring Ensemble, which is now the Ensemble Offspring. Has it changed drastically over the last 25 years?
Well, I mean, yes, because if you think about how those ensembles start, and we know many of those ensembles that have come out of the con, of course, you know, they come a little bit out of need for the composers to have their music performed. And that's exactly how our ensemble started. You know, it was really so Damien and Matt could have their final year recitals performed by musicians who wanted to be doing it. And so it could have just ended the way most of those groups end. And I guess the big difference was that Damien is a pretty amazing and special person, and he obviously decided that he wanted to keep this group going. He wanted to have this, it was pretty much a collective, you know, like people would come and go. I went to Europe. Other people left. It was the most random. It was like a CPW group in the beginning. There was like 2 saxophones, 2 trombones, 2 percussionists, 2 pianos. Like, it was really weird combination. But it's really thanks to Damien, and I guess the fact that enough people hung around to play and stay. But, you know, we had Carl Rosman as our clarinet player in the beginning, and he's now in Music Fabrique in Cologne, and Mark Knoop used to play with us, and he's an amazing pianist in London, as you might know. So, you know, we've had obviously different people play with us over the years, but it really solidified more into the direction that we've gone in the last kind of 10 years when I came back from Holland and I said to Damien, do you want a hand? Like, I knew I wanted to start my own group, but it just seemed crazy. Why would I start a group to rival the group that I was already in that Damien had kept going? So I said, you know, I may as well help you. I know it's really hard work. So that's what happened. And we became co-artistic directors. And then obviously in 2015, Damien stepped back to focus on the con and his own composition. And it's just, it was scary when Damien stepped down, because our model had always been like the composer and the performer who led the group together. And I have so much respect for Damien. So when he wasn't there to sort of bounce ideas off, it felt really lonely and it felt risky and it was hard. But in that time, it's 6 years, and that's also when my marriage broke down. So it's been a time of kind of finding myself, finding strength, realizing what I'm capable of. Also collaborating. So talking to lots of people and making sure that I'm always, getting feedback and being a better person, being a better artistic director, being a better, leader in the rehearsal room, and also being a better boss with our employees, because no one teaches you how to manage 3 or 4 staff members, and that's been really confronting and really hard. I have to do performance reviews, and we have to adhere to KPIs and all those kinds of things, and I don't love it, but I guess what I've realized is it's just part of the deal. Like I have to do it, so I may as well do it as well as I can, and it's been a really great learning process, I have to say.
And how have you kept that sense of collaboration throughout the company and how it runs?
Well, I don't know if the musicians would say it's collaborative. I mean, I'm sure they would. I'm very lucky in the core members that we have. We are all very good friends, and I think that's kind of a real linchpin to why it works. If we weren't all so close, I think it would be hard, especially during these COVID times. But we all love the music that we play. I feel like they know that their careers have sort of blossomed more into kind of new music through the last kind of 5 to 10 years of really doing more with Ensemble Offspring, and they're all soloists in their own right as well, and they're amazing musicians and just beautiful people, and they trust me as well, so they know that we all have similar musical tastes, and it's kind of we review every concert through a creative committee process with the whole group afterwards, so we do a reflection process, and it's hard kind of getting their feedback sometimes, but it's very important for the, making sure we always do things better, and it's good. Like, I feel like it works at the moment, and if we could do concerts, it would be even better.
Have you had to shift everything into a digital sphere?
We're not really allowed to play together because it's a pretty extreme lockdown at the moment, so I've been doing this Instagram live kind of chat every Thursday night, and we've been we're about to launch a kind of digital platform, but we've just got to wait a little bit till we can actually make music with a couple of people. It's a bit tricky.
It is tricky, and it's difficult trying to do. I know there's an app everyone was using in the first lockdown. I can't remember what it's called anymore. A cappella, I think, where everyone was trying to play in their individual homes and sync it up to this app. But it's a different sensation not having all the musicians in one room reacting to each other and reacting to each other through a screened recording.
But it is, I have to say, for Naraboria, for our First Nations composer program, which we're going ahead with, Jessica Wells was amazing. She's been we would send in recordings to like a click track or a piano part that she recorded, and then by the time I did mine, I could hear everyone else's parts in my headphones, and it was surprisingly satisfying. Much better than playing the part by yourself.
Yes.
So, and it sounds okay. It sort of does the job showing the composers how it sounds. So
yes, and it's way better than MIDI. I mean, which is the only other aid you have when you're writing by yourself. I should mention, actually, when I was a student, and actually when I was growing up, before I decided that I would pursue music for a career, Ensemble Offspring was the one ensemble in Sydney that made new music feel real. Because other than that, when we were studying new music as a high school student, it only really happened when we did the HSC course and we had to learn about 25 years of Australian music. And Ensemble Offspring was performing in the West and across the CBD at that point, and that was my memory of new music being actually tangible. So it was super cool.
There's a lack of that in Sydney, obviously. I mean, there should be more than just us, and we also can't play this. Like, I've just been watching the Darmstadt on demand programs and being reminded of how I don't know how to say this really without sounding derogatory to Australian audiences, and I don't mean it this way at all, but there's a certain kind of limit to what people kind of will really listen to in Australia still, I think, compared to the most cutting edge kind of like German festival that has always done that. So of course it's not going to be the same, you know, people don't have the same experience of listening to new music, but I wish there was a broader spectrum in our city of groups like ours who did the more extreme stuff and the more, you know, whatever stuff. But I feel a little bit like, because we're the only funded ones and we have been going for so long, and, you know, hopefully people recognise that as, you know, having an excellent standard in performance as well, that there isn't that much more space for more than us. And it seems kind of insane. It's like Matt Schlum once said to me, actually, you know, the antique store always does better if it's on a street with lots of other antique stores. You know, you don't want the antique stores really spread out. You want to go and just check out the antique stores. And I feel like Sydney does not really have antique stores in a row. Melbourne kind of does, and London definitely does. But Sydney, New South Wales has not really been the greatest supporter of contemporary music over the last kind of 10 to 15 years. And I shouldn't say anything bad about the New South Wales government, because they have supported us, but I do think there's definitely an appetite for more than just what we provide. But I'm glad we're still able to do it.
Yes. Well, I hope that kind of environment changes, because, I always associated my own city, New South Wales, with a bit more of a conservative leaning in terms of contemporary music making. I suppose we have you know, the Opera House, which is, I suppose, for some reason has turned into a very conservative traditional space because it houses the opera and the orchestra, and they are less likely to play contemporary music.
We have Carriage Works, which is great, but because Carriage Works was run by an art curator for so many years, hasn't. I mean, Carriage Works has never really been a music space. It happens to be a music space sometimes, but they don't even have a piano. So, you know, you're right in a way that I think venues are part of the issue, as well as real estate being very expensive, making venues hard to hire, making it harder for younger groups to keep going, you know, and keep presenting concerts, because it's just bloody expensive, you know.
Yes.
Actually, how did you find all the kind of weird and wacky venues across Sydney? Because I just remember going to Ensemble Offsprings. I would go to venues sometimes I'd never even heard of. And my first one was one, I think you did a performance in various tents.
Underneath.
You went to the Secret Noise, yeah.
I did, yeah.
Oh my God, that was crazy. That was Damien's big show. And yeah, Damien bought all those tents, and we did the little like one-on-one performances, and then there was the main show that was the lower town hall. And the funny story about that, which I don't think you were there that night because you would remember, the fire alarm went off. If we were in the main body of the town hall, you wouldn't have heard it apparently, but it was just because the lower town hall is sort of like alarmed, like it's a service kind of area, and so it was so loud, and we all had to go out onto the street in the middle of the concert with the whole audience. We're all in our like costumes, and oh my God, it was pretty, like, you never forget that. And we were so scarred by it that we've never performed at the lower town hall again because we're just too worried about the fire alarms going off. But yeah, Damien was great at finding alternative venues, and in a way we had to do it because there were no other options. You know, like we were the first group who played in the studio when it opened at the Opera House. It reopened, and the studio were amazingly supportive of us, and that was really important, I think, for also being taken seriously in a kind of funding situation. So that was awesome. But then the studio, of course, couldn't make any money by supporting new music, and so it turned into more of a cabaret venue, and so we weren't able to play in the studio anymore. And now we play in the Utzen room if we play in the Opera House because we can't afford it. And so then again we were forced back to looking at, you know, churches in Paddington and other, you know, City of Sydney spaces, or just, I guess it's just, you're just looking for places to play, and you just find cool places, and most of them don't, you know, places that you might have seen us play 10 years ago, we don't tend to use now because maybe they have a different owner and they're not, you know, they're not open to housing concerts anymore. And Sydney is a bit fickle like that. So it does make it hard to find venues, yeah.
Do you have any advice for any young musicians or ensembles looking for spaces in Australia?
It's tricky. We have a bit of a list, and I should make it public because it's quite hard to sort of, you feel like every time you need to find a venue, you're like racking your brains from scratch again, and that's not a great thing. So I will try and share the list on our Ensemble Offspring website. That's just Sydney venues. We use a great space in Darlinghurst called East Sydney Community Arts Centre, which is where we do Hatched Academy. And yeah, we love it at that venue. It's more of a dance venue, and you can't have a piano because it's sort of a sprung floor, I think. But it's beautiful because it's got windows on either side. And the last 2 years that we've been there, actually, I think last year it was COVID. We had to shut down early because of COVID, the Northern Beaches outbreak. And then the year before it was the bushfires. And we were sort of like stuck in there with smoke surrounding us, not being able to see the cathedral or the city. And so we've got pretty interesting memories of being in that space, but it's an awesome space.
Oh, great. I should check it out, actually. I don't know that many spaces in Sydney. I feel slightly disconnected with Sydney recently.
Well, you don't really need to know spaces in Sydney when you're living in London.
That's true. Maybe one day when I return.
For our first intermission is from Claire's 2017 album, Clairaudient, and is a performance of Steve Reich's work, Vermont Counterpoint, on vibraphone. Well, you mentioned Hatched Academy, and before you mentioned the Nara Barrier First Nations program that Ensemble Offspring is running. I was wondering how all of these things came to be, because not only do you have those two programs, one for commissioning and one for educational or training for emerging young artists, but you're also a key change ambassador. The Ensemble Offspring is a key change ambassador. And you have quite a strong record in terms of your commitment to commissioning new Australian music. How has that all happened, and how do you manage all these different streams of pushing music forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's to be honest, it's probably a few too many streams that we try and do on the actual kind of skeleton staffing and funding that we have. But I think Damien would agree, and I definitely feel that, who's going to champion new music if it's not the new music ensemble in that city? And, we're lucky to have this position. And when we got more into private philanthropy, which is only really in the last 10 years, and it's something very much that we're still working on and, trying to get people on the ride with. But of course, what most people like the being associated with is the creation of new music. And so I think it's fair to say we commission probably more than, many new music ensembles in the world. And it's a lot of music within our program to premiere because we do commission so much. But I just think it's so important because these composers, they don't have so many outlets in Australia of groups like ours who are just willing to workshop their pieces and give feedback and be really honest and let them basically have carte blanche in relation to their aesthetic directions and what they want to do musically. And so, especially through Hatched Academy, that was our way of providing that for emerging composers at that period where you sort of like finished at uni and you don't really know, how am I going to make a career of this? How am I going to make a living? Is this a viable thing? And I think, it's good for us as well because it keeps us, as we get older, let's be honest, in contact with younger musicians, what they're doing, what they care about, all those things. And, it's a two-way stream. So Naraburia is exactly the same. It's not just the composers and the First Nations artists who are benefiting from being able to work with us. It's more, I think it's more that we get to understand Aboriginal culture more deeply through really getting to know those people, those musicians and those artists. And if we didn't have that program, which we've now been involved with for 5 years, I feel like my network of Aboriginal kind of friends and collaborators and artists would be still so small, actually. And so through that program, we've all gotten to meet these amazing, inspiring, broad range of people, all different ages, all different backgrounds. And we have so much to learn from them, just even if you're going to talk in relation to how to articulate the cultural differences and how to navigate that. It's not easy. And I think the great thing about what's been happening in Australia in the last 3 years, with more orchestras doing rap plans, and we had started a rap plan, which is a reconciliation action plan, about 4 years ago, and now lots of people are doing it, and it's part of this journey of really committing to working on the issues. And I think it's definitely, there's change happening in Australia at the moment, and it's happening quite fast, and that's scary. And I think we have to make sure it happens at a speed where it can happen properly, where it's not just ticking boxes and not making real change. I think that real change can come, and it will take time, but with the orchestras getting on board, and even orchestras commissioning acknowledgements of country songs, and these things, they're big, and I think it's happening right now, and it's an exciting place to be. It's also a scary place to be, because it's much easier to just say, that's too hard, and we're not going to go there because it's just too hard and it's too risky and I could offend people. And we've learnt so much, and I'm really, really glad that we've had the opportunity to be involved in this program with the Australian Music Centre and Australian National University. So yeah, we're very fortunate to be involved in this program.
And so much incredible music has come out of that program, and incredible composers that honestly I don't think I would have been in contact with had it not been for the program, and getting to hear about them and watching their music develop over the program.
Yeah, and hopefully there are other programs similar but different coming up in Melbourne with Deborah Cheetham, and all around the country, I'd say, and Darwin, there's great stuff happening. So it's definitely not just our collaboration through Naraburia, but I think that's what I said before, I guess. It's like when everyone starts doing it together, then that's when you get this surge of kind of change and creativity, and exciting things happen. So we're right in the middle of it at the moment, and I think it'll be, it's an exciting time to be creating and making music.
Well, actually, you've just answered my next question. I was going to ask how we could make structural and non-tokenistic change in the industry. And I suppose perhaps I could kind of chisel that into specifically the key change ambassador work that Ensemble Offspring has done. A lot of the commentary, or maybe I suppose the criticism I hear from people when I talk generally about diversity and when they think about female composers, they're just saying, well, I mean, why can't we just program music that's good? It doesn't have to be written by a woman. Then it feels like we're just ticking off boxes. And I suppose I'm getting tired now because I don't know how to fight that statement.
So how do you go about that?
Such a load of crap when people say that. It's just like, it's usually guys who say it, let's be honest. And it's usually people who haven't really thought about the issue and why it is how it is now. And if there's obviously lots of amazing platforms now, like Don Women in Music and Key Change, and then and a lot of them are out of the UK actually. And this woman who just made a map with female composers from around the world on it, from the last 500 years or something. So there's a lot of people sort of, I guess, doing the work now to sort of show why this is necessary. So, and for me, the simple answer is, if the role models weren't there before, then they have to be made now. And if they're being made now for the first time, then that's why you need quotas. That's why you need to make systemic change. You need quotas. I'm very, very sure of that, because, and that's what Key Change is about. Actually, it's just simple quotas on not just programming, of course, but makeup of an orchestra, makeup of a band, boards, anything in the arts. And I do think, I mean, if you look at boards, that's another great example. Boards traditionally have been male dominated because that's how business has traditionally been run. And if you look at the arts, then arts boards are also male dominated. But why? The arts isn't business. And yes, in Australia at least, it feels a lot like the government's trying to make it look like business, which I don't think we are. But anyway, and so of course it should be equal, like genders on boards to get the say, to get, all those things. The women are there. So it's as simple as that. Make the quota, do the thing. With composition, I feel the same. The female composers are there. We're playing music by living composers. They're all there. Make the quota, do the thing. Like it's that simple. And so I think people are scared, especially orchestras, and I get why orchestras are scared, because they have other music that they also have to program. But the more I see the work that's being done in finding, say, lost voices of female composers from older times, older eras, the more I think it is going to be possible over time to find those voices that have been lost and champion them in that more classical tradition of sounding music. And then obviously there's no excuse with living composers, so they need to do that too. And again, I feel like the UK is leading the way through the orchestra's programming of new music, and gender equity. It's amazing to see. And I just feel like I'm so sick of having the conversation, because, like you say, there is really no answer. You just do it. And that's pretty much my motto in life is do it, then it's done. That's how I do everything. Like, it sounds so stupid, but you don't procrastinate. You don't go, oh, I'm scared of change. Oh, but I like things how they are. You just do it, and then it's done, and it will be done quickly. And then we can move on to First Nations voices, more diverse cultural voices, all those things that are important. The female thing should be a given by now. We've been doing it for 5 years. Let's move on now. So.
No, I agree. And sometimes the only thing I can say is, if you're listening to a piece of music, a new piece of music, you can't tell the gender of the person who wrote it. That's not possible.
And it's good music.
Yes.
Sorry, but that argument of, oh, well, we should just program good music. Yes, it is good music, but you might not have thought of it in the first place if you hadn't forced yourself to make a quota, because you're so used to not thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think we need quotas, because to get even us in 2017, when we programmed a whole series of female composers, for me that was amazing, because the reason why Damien and I did that was because we looked at our programming over the last kind of 15 years and we were like, oh my God, it's mostly dudes. Like, it just is. And there's a reason for that. It's great music. Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Xenakis. It's music that needs to be played. But there's also Sari Aho and Unsuk-Chin, and if you program them, equitably, then that's the starting point. And then if your commissioning and programming of younger composers is equitable, then then it's done. But it was something that we had to do consciously in the beginning too. So that's how I know it works, because now it just happens. So.
And do you find that happens beyond Ensemble Offspring as well, with either the students that you've taught or with yourself when you're judging what to play as a soloist?
Not yet. So that's an interesting question, because I did have this, I don't know if we have time, but I had this kind of like epiphany. Well, it was a bad epiphany. It was like 3 years ago I got asked to play at Music on Main in Vancouver to do a residency there. And David Pay, who's the artistic director, asked me to, send him some solo programs, and I said, okay, sure. And of course I wanted to play kind of things that I thought were classics, and it was mostly male composers on the list. And he said, oh, we're really trying for gender equity, so if you could include a few more females. And I just sort of realised, looking at my list as well, that in my repertoire I just did not have enough pieces by female composers. And then gradually over the last kind of 3 years, I've been lucky enough to work as one of the soloists in the Composing Women program at the Con. So I had all those great composers, including Ella Masons, who've written me quite a few solo pieces over the last 3 years. So that's been wonderful. And then more recently, I got some money from the Australia Council for my Rhythms of Change project, which was to commission about 8 Australian composers to write new works for me, female composers, which I wanted to be aimed more at sort of secondary and tertiary level, for this very reason that students can't change their habit of programming unless they know that there's good music out there by female composers. And so this is my big kind of, the thing I'm on about at the moment. I'm actually doing classes at conservatoriums around Australia on Zoom, because I can't go there, presenting on this new music that I've just commissioned and recorded, and kind of explaining also through my female composition list, which I just collated during lockdown, explaining why it is so important that they do think about this in their programming, and that they do familiarise themselves with this new music. I think it's really important.
For our second intermission is something quite special. Many thanks to Claire, this track is a sneak peek excerpt from Claire's upcoming album, Rhythm of Change, that is yet to be released. The following work is from Claire's performance of Ella Mason's work, Falling Embers. And would you say that's one of the essential things that we could do in our attempts to kind of modernize classical music?
I just listened to your conversation with Jessica Cottis, and I was very, gosh, she articulated it very well, I thought. And her take was more from the orchestral kind of perspective, I guess. And it is tricky because in a way it's, well, how do I say this? Like, what she was saying, I think, was really visionary, because there are so few people in the orchestral music sphere who are as open-minded as her, whereas I run a new music ensemble. This is what we do. So it's a bit cheating for me to sort of say that I know what the future is, because I'm not running an orchestra. I'm not conducting an orchestra. I'm not wedded to that tradition, and therefore not the patrons who expect that tradition. And I think that is part of the issue. And I think what orchestras need to do is not assume what their audience wants and don't want. And they also have to, like what the ABC have been doing in Australia, where they've been programming much better gender equity and also First Nations content. And so they're adhering to quotas rather than only worrying about what the audience wants to hear, because once they hear it a lot, they're not even going to remember what it was that they wanted to hear. So if you pander to what you assume that they want, then I think that's where you get into trouble. And I think that's what a lot of marketing departments of orchestras are still doing. And I just think it's totally insane that there aren't more people working for those big organisations who are just like, yep, let's think outside the box. It's so easy. This is what needs to happen. And because it is about the marketing, really, isn't it?
It is.
That's what it is. I mean, the whole world is about the marketing. So if you think, if classical, I hate the word classical, but if classical music was marketed in a smarter way, then we'd all be fine. You know, yes, some people might walk out, but God, it happens all the time in mainland Europe, and that's apparently what in Darmstadt people still boo, apparently, and that's kind of the point of it. So I think we need more of this. We need more interaction. We need more excitement, more real, feelings about music, not just this kind of safe way of programming. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And you mentioned the word classical. Could we just do without it? Do you think art music or just plain out music?
It's so tricky, and you can't imagine how much time I've spent thinking about this, because of course we have to market what we do as well. And I remember when the Art Music Awards were rebranded in Australia to be Art Music Awards, and I remember thinking, I like it, but it doesn't at all describe how the music sounds, right? Which in a way classical does, because people have a pretty strong association with what they think is classical, which is probably a very good reason to get rid of the word classical if we could. And then I was thinking, how do you describe the musicians who play classical, in inverted commas, instruments? Let's call them orchestral instruments, and they spend 20 years of their life getting to be amazing at that instrument, versus say a singer-songwriter who can just play the guitar and it serves as a kind of a means to an end for them for their poetry to be amazing song, and they're accompanying themselves, but it's different in terms of their skill level on that instrument. How do you describe that? I often have an issue with calling myself a classical percussionist, for example. Yes, I was trained through a classical kind of trajectory, I guess, but that's not to say I play classical music. So yes, I do think we definitely need to do away with that word, but I still don't know of a good replacement for it, and that's the issue.
Nor do I. I think the word classical kind of conjures up that image of, people in tails and suits playing together
and those
in
wigs.
a concert hall. Yes.
Yeah, the wigs as well, from Haydn's day with the bits on the side. I think everyone has that imagery, and that's why it needs to be done away with. But I would love a word that conjured up, or any words that describe music that conjures up how it actually sounds, how it makes you feel. And we tend to describe things as I like to describe it as living, breathing new music. So music by living composers that's alive now. And as Jessica said when you spoke to her, all music was a premiere in its day. All music was risky or cutting edge in its day. And I think it's really important to remember that. And like she said, not to keep it in a glass cabinet, keep it alive, which is why this whole historically informed kind of trend of late has been so great, because it is this kind of keeping it alive, keeping it fresh. And I think the more we can have of that, the better. We need all music, and we also need the old stuff, like Jessica said, to sort of reference the new and know how to listen to the new. But I think I wrote an article for Limelight about the fear of the unknown in music, because I think there is a big fear of the unknown. And why is it that you can't, that art doesn't have that same fear? Obviously it's because you can walk away.
Yes.
Like that's a big one. You can't walk, you can, but not as easily can you leave a concert hall or leave a recital centre. So it's much more confronting for people, and I like to compare it to having a fear of sharks or skydiving or whatever. It's kind of a similar thing. It's not really based on anything, Really, it's not really based on anything you've ever experienced or had happen to you. So I think the more that we can really talk about it from a sense of like, you're open-minded about these things, be open-minded about music as well. Be ready to let the music wash over you. Let it make you feel things. It doesn't have to be a cerebral experience. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to understand it. And that's what I think is so exciting about it. It can be anything.
I think with like ensembles like Ensemble Offspring, the work you're doing, and various other ones in Sydney and across Australia, perhaps there's a chance to make a kind of more sustainable music culture where we're more inviting of new ideas and new people to hear things, rather than, I often find talking to people who are afraid of attending classical music concerts that they're expected to already know a lot of information about what they're going to experience. So I think the model of inviting people, as you say, to living, breathing concerts is one way to kind of ease that anxiety about needing to be very aware of classical music and its traditions.
And present it in a casual way and talk a lot and make it fun. I mean, that's my big thing. I have fun when I play, so why shouldn't the audience have fun when they're experiencing it? And I think it's happening, that people don't think of classical music as this kind of like staid, scary, kind of old-fashioned thing that they have to know stuff about. I think contemporary music was a little bit marred in the kind of 70s and 80s by this, the black skivvy sort of thing of being like very serious and and you have to understand it, and there's lots of notes and none of it is harmonic. But I feel like times are changing. We're going through a very different kind of period of the norm in terms of the way things sound, and hopefully we'll move on to a different one again soon enough. But I think the trend at the moment is hopefully one that will be able to bring in more people and be able to make people realise that it's about the experience. It's not so much about all the other old-fashioned kind of extraneous things around concerts and what that means, because I don't know, that's boring.
All that fluff. Actually, this is an aside, but I was talking to another Sydney composer just on Saturday, James Hazel, who I'm sure you've met before. Yes, you did. That's right. And we were having a quick conversation about how to, again, talking about why contemporary art is this kind of different, they have a different level of engagement with the public and how they've gotten to that. And we thought, wait, artists have this thing where they do open studios where the public can go in, or other artists can go in, they can see unfinished work or look at work that isn't polished and maybe isn't great yet. And perhaps we could do something similar with music where composers or performers, we do these kind of like open studios and trade ideas so that, again, we don't have a sense that everything needs to be perfectly polished all the time.
That's great. And you know what? The Peggy Glanville Hicks house in Sydney? So that's like a residency that a composer gets each year. And Aviva Endine was there this year, but she's just had to go back to Melbourne because of the whole lockdown thing. But the last open, like what they try and sort of, they suggest that the person who takes up the residency should sort of do an open house. And in the past, the people who've done those, they've just presented little concerts with the piano and a little bit interactive, and maybe some interviews, but nothing quite like the presentation we experienced at Aviva's, which was just that. It was kind of like a workshop where everyone was asked to sort of say what they thought and if they had any ideas. And it wasn't just musicians who were there. And it was really satisfying. It just felt like, yes, like this could be a way forward for audience and musicians alike. No, like you say, not that thing of feeling like everything has to be kind of, polished up and maybe it wasn't actually ready, but you have to pretend it is because that's the expectation. So I think I agree. I think there's definitely room for more of that sort of model.
That would be cool. I would show up to so many things just to see how people are working together and create this kind of communal space. Yeah. Well, I actually have one more question for you. And I'll start off with a quote from the article that you mentioned that you wrote for Limelight earlier this month. And it's from the tagline in which you say, "Many people are intimidated by new music because of a lifetime of sonic conditioning." And my question revolves around that idea and what kind of advice you have for upcoming young musicians and composers, or maybe not even upcoming musicians and composers, some established ones, as to how we can alleviate that pressure of sonic conditioning.
It's a tricky one. I mean, I think the answer is definitely not to pander to what they think audiences want. And I think composers like Amanda Cole, who've just been following their journey of quarter-tonal and music for her whole life, it's very much to be respected, I think, because I think you never really benefit from trying to do what you think audiences want. So I think for sure learning the craft in terms of instrumentation, even really like learning the craft in a kind of like being able to write fugues and being able to do things that are like traditional. And I think Australian composers are probably not taught those things nearly as much as in Europe and on mainland Europe. I know in Belgium, for example, they really are. And I think it's like learning your scales in a way. Like none of that stuff goes astray when you're trying to deviate from tradition because you've got all those skills. It's like your toolbox, and then you're kind of like, okay, I'm doing something else. And I think the structural, like getting a handle of kind of structural development and structuring works, which can come from analysis of lots of different types of music, that's really important, I find, in relation to holding an audience's, focus on your work. And at the end of the day, that is really important. You don't want to kind of dump your audience with some music and kind of go like, here you go, this is my music, like take it or leave it. I don't care if you like it or not. But at the same time, you have to do the thing that is true to your musical vision and your aesthetic kind of taste or whatever it is that you want to do at that point in your life and career. And I think it's really important to do a combination of both. Like you be true to yourself, be true to all the things that you believe in, but also you have to think about the craft and you have to really hone it. And you should never say, oh, well, I don't know if that's going to work on that instrument, but we can just see and whatever. Ask a musician. It's so easy. Yes, I know a lot of composers are quite shy and they don't want to do that and they're embarrassed. But, anyone in Ensemble Offspring you could ask. I mean, occasionally I'll get emails from like some random person in London or somewhere overseas who seen that I'm doing this female composition list, and this girl, she just said, I never got feedback from the people I wrote the piece for the competition. Would you be able to give me some feedback? And I was like, sure, I'll give you some feedback. I don't have much time, but I can open your PDF and give you some feedback. And I think most people, most performers are happy to do that. And I think that's our responsibility to composers. And I think it's not, like I said before with the CPW thing, it's not a one-way street. It's not, no longer is it performers serving composers and all composers just dumping a score on a performer's lap and saying, here you go, here's the final score. It's a process. It's this beautiful organic thing that is often a very long-term process, and it can be frustrating, and it's really hard work for both parties. It requires a lot of really open communication, but I think musically at the end of those processes the gold really can come, and I think that's why it is that I do what I do and why we do what we do with Ensemble Offspring, because when that does happen, and when you see a composer growing over a period of time as well, it's a beautiful thing. And like someone like James, he could reach out to us, and I think I said to Chloe Chung, a flute player, the other day, because we do this thing called Hatched Home Academy where we do mentoring online, and I say to all of them, like, you know, you're in the family now, you're in the inner circle, and if you've done anything in Hatched, you're in the inner circle, like, reach out. Like, if you need advice, if you need help, if you need to ask a question, reach out. We're here for you, you know. And I think it's really important that people don't ever kind of go, Claire's going to be too busy for me, or whoever. You know, most of us are happy to help, and I just think it has to be like that. It has to be this one big family, and we're all just in it together, because there's nothing else. There's like nothing else to gain. There's certainly no money in it. So we have to be doing it for the art and for the social times and for all the other great stuff that comes out of it.
It's also so much more fun to work that way, to have a community to bounce ideas off. I hate the idea of being isolated.
Well, yeah, and COVID certainly makes it hard, which was why it was great that we had the Home Academy when we did. It felt like really good timing.
That's so wonderful. Well, I'm going to go check out all the things I may have missed from being afar.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And yeah, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me. I've learned so many things, and I'm going to definitely pop information about the PRS key change and things like that some people may have not heard of into the description, so everyone can get access to that. So thank you so much, Claire.
Great. Thanks for having me, Vicky.
Yes, and absolutely another thank you to Claire. And to everyone who has been listening this whole time, you can again access information about Claire's work, her upcoming album release, and all the resources that we've spoken about during the episode, and information about Ensemble Offspring below. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening up, and see you in a few weeks for the next one.